Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name's John, and in today's video I'm going to walk you through a lo-fi hip-hop track and DAW template which I created in Logic Pro. But think about this, what if you couldn't use any of your favourite third-party plugins and instead you could only use Logic stock plugins? Well, today we're going to find out, because recently I embarked on a collaboration with my good friend Stevie B over at Production Music Tools to create a DAW template that producers could learn from and use to improve mixing techniques. To keep the template as accessible as possible, I was only able to use stock plugins and sounds that come with Logic Pro. No big deal, you might think. But when I realised that I couldn't use any of my tried and tested favourite plugins, I really had to think hard about how I could use the Logic stock sounds to achieve the same results. So buckle up, this might get bumpy. What I based my track around was an electric piano part. The electric pianos that come with Logic are actually pretty decent. What you don't get is that kind of vintage wobbly lo-fi sound. So there's a couple of things you can do to get that. Let's just have a listen to the keys as they are. We've got a bit of basic EQ, which is just cutting out the low end. Vintage Opto compressor. But I've used Fat Effects on the lo-fi resonant preset, and that is really helping to give it that sound. In addition, I am routing it for some bus processing, but what we're doing here is we're using sidechain compression. It's just a standard compressor, but it's set to vintage VCA. The sidechain engaged, and the track that's controlling the sidechain is the kick. So this is the kick sidechain. Now it's not actually going out of the main outputs, so we don't want to hear that ourselves. That kick track is being sent to the sidechain here, and that is what is controlling, giving it that pumping effect, and also create a bit of space for the kick as well. So if we listen to the electric piano without any processing, and then we switch all the plugins back on, so let's move on. So I've called these synth shots because they're kind of like stabs, really. We are using Alchemy, which is a great Logic synth. I would say it's probably one of the best for me, and just the sheer amount of presets that you get with it is fantastic. I ended up using a preset to begin with, but then I adapted it, edited it, and made it my own. So I think the original patch was just called Luminous Tines. So let's have a listen before any of the processing and before I tweaked the patch. Yeah, I did quite a bit of tweaking with this. I believe I changed some of the sources and just tweaked the envelope as well. I used quite a severe amount of EQ because there was way too much low end. Then we added in the tape delay. I find tape delay always makes things sound a little bit more vintage anyway. And then we've got the Space Designer, which is another great plugin, a great reverb, often overlooked. But this is just using a preset called Black Hole, which is quite a long reverb. So I was fairly happy with it like that, but I was trying to get close to the original synth that I was using, which was the Labs synth. So what I did was I actually analysed the EQ of the original Labs synth using this Logic EQ called Match EQ. Again, you can use the sidechain. In the old session where I had the Labs synth, that was set to the Labs synth track. And then all it does is analyse the sound of the Labs synth or whatever you've got going to the sidechain and apply it to the current track that you're on. And so now we listen to it again. and without. It's making quite a big difference, right? So a lot of that is because it's boosting these mid-range frequencies in this area here, and then it's cutting a little bit of 5 to 10k, cutting out a lot of low end, and then boosting it in the very high frequencies. So for me, that made a huge difference, and it takes a lot of the guesswork out of EQ decisions. The next track, I did create that in a previous session in Logic, but that's a different video altogether. So yeah, we're just using this as a transition really. It comes in for the chorus, it comes in after the breakdown, and it comes in right at the end of the track. And next, let's go back to the melody synths that I'm using. So a lot of these are just picking out simple melodies to go along with the chords. And this is another Alchemy synth patch called Clean Cool Vibes. We've got a bit of EQ, but then we've got two space designers. Now, why have we got two? And that's because they're not both acting as reverbs. Space Designer is really good at using impulse responses, and impulse responses don't have to be standard reverbs or real world spaces. They can be preamps or speakers, and this one is called a circuit bent speaker, and that's in the warped effects. If you look under speakers, this one I found just gave it a bit more of a lo-fi sound. So if we turn both of those off, once you add in these two space designers, and just to show you what the other space designer is doing, it's a black hole, 4.2 seconds. I believe that's in large spaces, yep, large warped spaces. The other melody track, which is doing pretty much the same thing as the other one, is Celesta. And that's just the sampler plugin. And on its own, once I add in this little bit of EQ, the space designer in, and again, it's my favorite black hole preset. And then you combine these two melodies together. And then we've got two more melody tracks. It's a Alchemy patch, Clean Cool Vibes, without any processing. Quite boring on its own. The EQ, again, nothing crazy there. This is similar to the other melody synth where I use tape delay, but I'm using this flutter rate and flutter intensity to really make the delayed sound vintage, wobbly, lo-fi. You'll hear what I mean now when I play it back. So if I put the wet signal up to 100, and you can hear that the flutter rate and the flutter intensity is kicking in, it's modulating the sound and making it wobbly, like the kind of effects you would get from the tape effects that we all love in lo-fi music. And then the final plugin, it's Space Designer, but this time I'm using a 2-second medium haul. That is combined with this other melody here. So again, layering, Alchemy again. It's the Gentle Sine Bells patch. This is just another simple patch. I don't think I've done as much to this at all, just a bit of EQ. It sounded nice on its own. Let's have a listen next to the strings. And it's just using the Studio Strings plugin from Logic. I don't think I've changed anything here. It's just the violins patch. I'll tell you what, let's play it again without any of my plugins. So it's almost too nice to use in a lo-fi track. I had to take out a lot of low end, so you're only hearing really above 4K. We've got the fat effects again. Now this time I'm using a patch called Filthy Strings. So I'm not actually using auto filter as a traditional filter here, and I'm using the LFO. What we will hear is the LFO affecting the cutoff based on this envelope and how fast the rate of the LFO is moving. So if you make it faster. So what I was trying to do here was recreate the effect kickstart, which is a little bit like the sidechain compression that I've set up with the synths and things like that. It was just a different way of doing it. I wanted to add a little bit of randomness to it. It's almost like tape strings, you know, like a mellotron, or strings that have been recorded to wobbly tape. So next let's have a look at the guitar, and this is a sample. So this is from the Tangerine Sounds sample pack, Vintage Vibe. So you can go and check that out if you're interested. I chopped it up, just used half of it. It was just nice to come in occasionally and not have it run through the whole track. Next we've got the bass guitar. As you find this in the DAW template, it is just a standard MIDI track, but the way that I created it was actually using the Logic Session Player. So here's how you set one up. You just go to Track and New Session Player, and then you would choose Bass Player from there and the type of bass player that you wanted. The way this works is it will create a part for you, a bass part. It's a little bit like the Logic Drummer. It will only work if you have chords set up. So you have to change the chords in the global tracks up here. Right click and choose chords. Then you can start putting in chords like that. It will create a bass line for you based on those chords that you've told it are in the track. And that's what I did. But once I was happy with that, I turned that to MIDI. So you can just right click and then choose Convert to MIDI region, and then it'll just show up. I went in and I edited some of it to my own taste, really. Let's have a listen to it. Then we're on to the drums. I just used the Logic Drum Machine Designer, which looks to be the Dark Arts patch. I've beefed them up with some samples. These are from the Lo-Fi Tape Drums Volume 1 pack. And then in the chorus we've got a bit of variation here. So we've got some wooden percussion. Also got a tambourine which comes in. They all go to the drum bus. And the drum bus has got a bit of basic EQ. The compressor also got a limiter as well. And then finally you've got an auto filter. You can see it really kicking in at this point. We've got a few percussion instruments going on. This shaker. We've also got a tambourine loop. These EQ boosts here really help it cut through. Now there's this drum loop. So first of all, it's a drum loop which again I created for one of my own sample packs. I wanted this to sound like it was being scratched by a DJ, and what you can do is you can use a combination of normal played back audio followed by a reversed audio. This one is just normal. That should be a reversed kick drum. So as you can see here, I've ticked this parameter here in the inspector which says reverse. If I untick it, it goes back to playing it the normal way. But yeah, what you're hearing is a forward kick, a reverse kick, and then just repeated. And then I believe I've done that to the snare as well. So again, forward snare, reverse snare. And when you put that together quickly, here's what you get. We have also got a top loop, again from one of my own sample packs. This one is from the Cat Toy Drums Lo-Fi sample pack. Then we've got a drum fill. There's quite a bit of processing on that though, so if we bypass them, I wanted to make it a bit more lo-fi. So again, EQ is your friend here, taking out lots of low end and a bit of high. Compressor, vintage Opto, and then 2 instances of Chroma Glow. Now this is a fairly new plugin for me anyway. I've not used this before. I think it came in version 11, but it's great. And I'm using a preset here called Dirt Drums. Think of it a little bit like Soundtoys Decapitator. And yeah, it's adding that crunchiness to the drums. And then the second Chroma Glow, similar but less. That's just a different patch called Warm and Tucked. So together they're, you know, really adding that crunchy sound. So all of these sounds that you're hearing now are icing on the cake. They're transition sounds, such as this one, which is a reverse crash. I must have used matched EQ in the end, and I can't remember what I based this on. Maybe I used a sample, maybe I liked the other sample sound and used that as kind of like a side chain input so that it would match the curve of the sample that I liked. The high end is taken out, so it just makes the cymbal more mellow. Bar chimes. Often with bar chimes I will use the Soundtoys Panman plugin, but as this was not available to me, just using stock plugins, I just drew in some automation. So it's panning left and right as it plays back, and that combined with some stereo delay and again the concert hall Chroma Verb patch just creates a nice little transition there with the bar chimes. But another transition sound, which is this noise sweep. I created this noise sweep myself, and then I just applied some EQ and very, very long 7.8 seconds reverb from Space Designer. Yeah, it's adding some interest to what is otherwise just quite a normal sounding noise sweep. It's always nice to have a couple of claps and snaps in a lo-fi track. Yeah, just making the sounds longer, because without those effects on, they're quite short sounds. And then with. Finally, at the bottom here, we've got a couple of Foley textures. So one of them is Atmos of birds and kind of like just a garden atmosphere. So I had to filter out a lot of that with the EQ. So what I'm doing here is, again, I'm using auto filter to kind of create a pumping movement effect. We're actually modulating with the LFO again and using the envelope to kind of control the cutoff filter. Also, we've got the Chroma Verb. The final auto filter is taking out extreme high frequencies. Finally, it wouldn't be a lo-fi track without a vinyl crackle. The last thing that I didn't show you earlier were the vocals. These are again samples which I recorded myself, but they've got a lot of reverb and they are pitched up quite high. This is one that I created for a sample pack called Lo-Fi Essentials. The other ones I created, these are not available elsewhere. I created these specifically for this track, just doing ad-libs and then sampling my own voice. And these are like little one-shots. These are the sort of samples that I would usually get from Splice. They work really well in these kind of lo-fi tracks. But to get that vintage sound, or the lo-fi sound, I had to use these plugins here. So let's listen to them dry. I've added in EQ. Then we've got the compressor, a vintage VCA compressor, Chroma Verb, again the concert hall, and then the auto filter just to take out the very high frequencies. What you are hearing is a lot of the pumping from this compressor here. Again, it's using the kick as a side chain, so it gives it that pumping feeling in time with the kick drum. I'm also using a bit of tube EQ on all of the vocals. This is fairly new to Logic. It was introduced in version 11, I believe. This is on the pop vocal preset, and all together with those effects and plugins. I hope you found this video useful. Let's finish by listening to the whole track. Enjoy. So there we go, folks. Let me know in the comments if you have any favourite Logic stock plugins. There are some real hidden gems in Logic which I certainly had overlooked. I think sometimes we become too reliant on our favourite third-party plugins. Using a limited set of stock Logic plugins really made me think about what each plugin was doing, and in the end I was able to achieve similar results to mixers where I've used plugins costing hundreds of dollars. If you'd like to check out the DAW template and the track that I have just demonstrated in this video, then why not head over to the Production Music Tools website, and if you're watching this in November 2025, they currently have a Black Friday sale on where you can save 50%. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.